This is not the video that I set out to make. I've tried to make everything on my channel happy and cheerful, or at least helpful. This was originally meant to be 2 videos of snorkeling around Boca Chica Key. The first video was snorkeling along the wall at the west side of the island, from about where the harbor is, going south with the tide, just floating along on the outgoing tide along the wall, to the south end of the island where the wall ends and there's a little beach. The other was to be snorkeling around the mangroves at the northeast corner of the island, where the channel between Boca Chica Key and Ragged Key number 5 lets water from Biscayne Bay flow out into the ocean on the outgoing tide. I had done both dives 2 years earlier, in 2017, when I was at the island with the sailboat. And what impressed me the most was the number of fish. There were hundreds, thousands, an uncountable and seemingly endless multitude. And lots of different coral species growing on the seawall itself, on the bay side of the island. I wanted to show Mimi all the beautiful fish and corals, and we did these 2 snorkeling excursions. And it's unbelievable how things have changed in just 2 years. Everything, all the corals are covered with some sort of green algae, and there's some purple shaggy stuff that flaps with the current. It's maybe an inch long. I don't know if it's another kind of algae or a kind of seaweed. This has overgrown over all the coral, and I hardly saw any fish. I did attempt, when I was filming, to find the few remaining pieces of interesting coral, and looked for places where there was sponges, coral, or fish to film, and it was very difficult to find anything. I think I had enough to make sort of a cheerful video, but that's not the truth of what happened there. There'll be like a lot of coral and little fish and stuff right at the wall. I don't think I've ever seen a crab like that before.
There was crab there?
Yeah. I noticed this is better for scuba than snorkeling.
What? Your GoPro?
Yeah, watch. With my head in the normal snorkeling position, the camera is out of the water half the time. What's wrong? What's wrong with this picture?
Oh yeah, it's not going down in.
Instead of adjusting it on my mask, I just take it off of there and hand hold it for the rest of the dive.
yeah. Last time I was here, there were a lot of fish sitting in the shade under these trees.
As we continue south along the wall, I'm looking for fish or coral or anything interesting to video. And I did find this beautiful piece of coral growing here. It's very intricate with lots of little branches and lots of little crevices and places for things to hide, actually. It's such a good hiding place that it wasn't until now that I saw this beautiful little tropical fish that's bright yellow and blue. He apparently lives in that little briar patch of coral. This coral here, the white thing, is bleached. It's either severely stressed or dying. And everywhere is this brown algae growing on the wall and some purple shaggy stuff. Here are 3 different species of coral growing together again. And there's that shaggy stuff that sort of flaps in the breeze. But all the lumps underneath that green, brown-green algae is the coral that I had seen there just 2 years earlier. All the coral that was growing on the wall, with the exception of the few pieces I found to take video of, have been overgrown by this algae and that shaggy stuff. I don't know if the shaggy stuff is... Oh, there's another nice piece of coral there. But you can see the lumps underneath the algae. And that all used to be coral. Here's some more coral here. But it's mostly on and on and on with the algae covering everything. We've finally gotten to the south end of the island, and the seawall ends, and there's a little beach here. And behind the seawall, in an area sheltered from the tidal flow, there are some fish, and it's just wonderful being here. We can sit in the water, and it's really like being in a fish tank. And we're in the shade of this tree on a beach on a tropical island. What could be better? Something is very wrong. Where did the fish go? This was the exact same dive that I made just 2 years ago. This is this year, 2019. And this was 2 years earlier in 2017, in exactly the same place. In fact, when I made the video from when I was there on the sailboat, I was commenting on how many fish there were and how it seemed as though you could eat a fish every day and you would never ever run out. So again, this is this year. There are some corals growing on the wall, and there are some stressed or dead corals, but most everything is covered with this algae and also mats of this purple shaggy stuff. That there are the other corals growing. That shaggy stuff that I'm not sure whether that's a type of seaweed that's growing on the algae or a different kind of algae. Most of the lumpiness underneath the algae is what used to be coral. I keep looking for interesting things to video and not finding anything. And this is the exact same spot. This is 2 years earlier in 2017. I can see lots of different species of coral. There is some green growth there. There's some snails. There's an urchin. There's sort of a lighter green growth starting. But I can see lots of different kinds of coral. And it's frequent. It's all over the wall, really. And in addition to the coral, there's the snails, there's the urchins. These large clumps of coral here have all been overgrown by the algae now. This year we didn't see any of the urchins or the snails. This beautiful purple anemone was gone. There's so much life here, so many fish from this footage from 2017, and it's just amazing how things changed between then and 2019. These are the mangroves at the northeast corner of the island. And almost as soon as I'm in the water, I see fish. They're just everywhere. This is 2017. And I'm at the island with my sailboat, and the mangroves are just filled with mangrove snapper and several other different species of mid-sized fish. And just tons of these little tiny minnow things that I guess are baby fish. The smaller fish take refuge in amongst the roots of the mangroves from predators. Larger fish can't maneuver amongst the complicated roots as well as the small fish, so it's a briar patch where the smaller fish can hide from the bigger ones. When I first visited here, it was just amazing. Everywhere there were fish. There was almost two levels. These colorful sergeant majors and the minnow things occupying the upper part of the mangrove root mass, and the snappers and other mid-sized fish occupying the lower stories. And it was just no problem getting video of fish, because everywhere you go around the mangrove roots, it's just full of fish. An abundance that you would think would last forever. And this is such a nice dive. It's in waist deep water. So I'm just basically wading around with a mask and snorkel. And the number of fish is just absolutely amazing. They go on and on. And this is 2019. This is the exact same mangrove patch as I had dove just 2 years earlier. And we're going around looking everywhere, trying to find some fish. Two years earlier, this was just swarming with fish. You couldn't wave a camera around like this without seeing dozens at least. And here we are searching to see if we can find some fish to take some video of. There are some fish here. There are still some of the colorful yellow and black striped sergeant majors. They are the primary survivor here. As we're looking for fish, we're crawling way in amongst the mangrove roots. It's not like 2 years ago when you could just float around out here and there'd be fish everywhere you looked. Here we're a little bit further south along the island. And there's some bigger sergeant majors. And even further south, we did find these small to mid-sized fish. And here we're quite a ways from the channel between Boca Chica and the next island, away from where the water from Biscayne Bay flows out into the ocean. And we're not finding fish like 2 years ago, but there are fish. So we saw all that, and then I got Vibrio. Vibrio is an antibiotic-resistant flesh-eating bacteria. It started as a very small sore that seemed insignificant, and later that day it had gotten bigger. So I put some Neosporin on it and wrapped it up with a bandage. And when I was going to change the bandage that night, it had doubled in size again, and had sort of a red inflamed ring around what was an open, oozing wound. So I wrapped that up with a paper towel and some alcohol and kept that moist throughout the night, hoping to draw the infection out. In the morning, the area that had been red and inflamed was now an open, wet, oozing wound, and there was a much bigger ring of red around that. And I hadn't felt good for the past day. I had been very tired, a bit nauseous, and just didn't feel like doing anything. I had also noticed a red stripe that was coming from the wound and moving up my foot and ankle. And at this point, I decided it was just not working having me try to treat this myself. Mimi got me to the hospital, and the park service, the marina was full, but they allowed us to tie the boat up by the seawall just on an emergency basis, which wound up being a little over a week, which was really very, very helpful. It allowed me to get treatment sooner than I would have if I had to, spend a day or two trying to find a place for the boat. When I arrived at the emergency room, I was kind of apologetic. It was still just a small wound. And I said, my normal doctor's 200 miles north of here, and I didn't know where else to go. But the emergency room doctor said, you're in the right place. And they gave me IV antibiotics and 2 different kinds of antibiotic pills that I took with me. And I had to follow up with my regular doctor 200 miles to the north, and was briefly in a hospital in Vero Beach, Florida during this time. And I didn't know it at the time, but I found out later from newspaper articles that 3 people had died from the same infection swimming by the city of Miami Beach, Florida, the week that I was sick. And even for Florida, that's a lot. As far as I could find out, only 9 people prior to this group of 3 had died this year from this bacteria, and 7 the year before. The problem is that the center of the state of Florida is filled with these big corporate farms. And they fertilize the fields with everything from chemical fertilizers to the sludge from all the sewer treatment plants from the cities. It's a disposal problem for the cities, and so the state has been allowing it to be spread on the agricultural areas as fertilizer. So if you've gotten tomatoes or other vegetables grown in Florida, your food was grown in poop. And when it rains, untreated runoff from all of these fields goes into the waterways in the center of the state, and the water management districts use artificial canals to direct all this excess, now contaminated water to the rivers at the east and west coasts of the state. And this is where the population centers are and where people go to enjoy the water and beaches and things of this nature, catch fish. The reason for the boats, the sailboat and now this boat, is mainly because I would like to go to the Bahamas and spend as much time as I can there. I was fortunate enough to have spent a lot of time there when I was a lot younger. And my reason for wanting to go is that the Gulf Stream flows through the islands and brings clean water from the Caribbean. And it's kind of difficult to have dirty water in the Bahamas. And the water is crystal clear. And there's all sorts of beautiful corals and fish and lobsters. And Florida used to be this way. The water here used to be crystal clear. We had an abundance of fish and corals, and there was no need to go anywhere else to swim at clean beaches or snorkel and see fish and corals and this sort of stuff. And Florida isn't that way anymore. There have been decades of the water quality getting worse and worse and worse here, and now it's come to this. Even people are dying from being in the water. And Florida didn't used to be this way. And I guess that's what this video is about, and I guess that's all I have to say about it for now.